Mystery Bookshop presents a conversation with Sophie Hannah. Sophie Hannah is a Sunday Times and New York Times best-selling writer of crime fiction, published in 49 languages and 51 territories. Her books have sold millions of copies worldwide. In 2014, with the blessing of Agatha Christie's family and estate, Sophie published a new Poirot novel, The Monogram Murders, which was a bestseller in more than 15 countries. She has since published 3 more Poirot novels, Closed Casket, The Mystery of Three Quarters, and The Killings at Kingfisher Hill, all of which were instant Sunday Times top 10 bestsellers. In 2013, Sophie's novel The Carrier won the Crime Thriller of the Year award at the National Book Awards. She has also published 3 short story collections and many poetry collections, one of which, Pessimism for Beginners, was shortlisted for the T.S. Eliot Award. Her poetry is studied in schools across the United Kingdom. In 2018, she published a self-help book called How to Hold a Grudge: From Resentment to Contentment. Sophie helped to create a master's degree in crime and thriller writing at the University of Cambridge, for which she is the main teacher and course director. And she is also the founder of the Dream Author Coaching Program for writers. She lives with her husband, children, and dog in Cambridge, where she is an honorary fellow of Lucy Cavendish College. Sophie, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me on.
Oh, it's my particular pleasure because I've been reading the Poirot novels, and this gave me an opportunity to look at your previous works, and there is so much to unpack. You're like a writerly onion because you've published several.
I've never been called an onion. Well, I have been called an onion, but not a writerly onion. We have an expression in our family: if someone's being silly, we call them a funny onion.
Oh.
But I've never been called a writerly onion before.
Well, you just kind of remind me of writers like Anthony Burgess, who you look at their list, they have so many things they've done in so many different categories because you've written poetry, self-help, you're running your teaching programs, you have standalone mystery thrillers, your series as well, and of course the Poirot novels. And I find most fascinating when I was doing the research that the majority of this was produced after you had your baby at 31. Is I understand that correctly?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'd been writing pretty much constantly my whole life. So even before I had children, I'd been writing. But it just so happened that when I had my first baby, that was when I had my idea for a first crime novel, which was actually about a newborn baby. So there was definitely a connection there. And then that was when my career sort of first really took off as a novel writer, was when I had two kids under 3.
Yeah.
So, I was busy.
Well, in sort of a relatively short period of time, you've become a very productive and prolific writer as well. The first thing we'll want to start with is the thing I'm afraid I know the least about, which is your Simon Waterhouse and Charlie Zayer mystery thriller series.
Yeah.
What can you tell our readers about it?
So there are 10 books in the series. They are set in a fictional English county called the Culver Valley. Simon Waterhouse is a brilliantly clever detective who has a very unusual personality. I'm not going to describe how he has an unusual personality because it's not in any of the ways you might expect. He's not a sort of hard-drinking, divorced womanizer that everyone's so used to meeting in crime fiction. He's just a genuinely strange guy, but a brilliant detective. And Charlie Zayer is, well, at the beginning of the series, she's his colleague. Their relationship develops in various ways after that. And then there's a team of other detectives who are involved as well. So they're my sort of regular series characters. And there have been 10 novels so far, and I'm writing the 11th at the moment.
Mm-hmm. So it's the kind of story where they still follow in the psychological thriller type of genre, the type as opposed to like Peter Lovesey, some of the other English writers. They tend to focus more on, I don't want to say more on the case themselves. I'm sounding very ignorant here, for which I apologize, but I wanted to try to get a better understanding for readers that it's more like this than like that.
Yeah, so they are psychological thrillers that have an element of police procedural. In each book, there is half of the narration is in the first person from the point of view of the protagonist, who is unique to that book. So in that sense, they feel like psychological thrillers because each one has a first person narrator, or it's always a woman, and that narrator is always unique to that book and the person whose life is being affected by the crime, whatever it is, or by the mystery. But then those chapters are interspersed with more traditional sort of police procedural style chapters. So they feel like psychological thrillers, basically, but they do have that my sort of regular police team who are main characters as well.
Mhm. I think what kind of confused me is that I saw them listed on some places as your Waterhouse and Zayler, and then Culver Valley as well. And I didn't quite grasp in time that it was actually the same
It's
series.
the same series, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's sort of like there's the some New York. There's a New York police series, and again I'm blanking out. And it's sort of like again you have a multiple cast of characters, and it's kind of like whoever depends what the needs of the story comes up with that you tend to focus on them.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So then and that is I think that's the kind of thing the notion of your focus on the psychological aspects is kind
Yeah.
of runs like a thread through all your works, uh,
Yeah.
particularly the element of obsession, which
Okay.
as I started to read I read some of your short stories,
Yeah.
and going through the Poirots, and then some of the nonfiction that you've written, including How to Hold a Grudge, about which I want to talk about later. Obsession is a very strong thread and a very strong motivating force, and I'm not used to actually encountering that in the type of mystery reading that I do. I find that fascinating.
Yeah,
What,
I mean, you're quite right to say that I am very, very interested in obsession and psychology. So, whatever kind of book I'm writing, I'm always interested in people and the way their minds work and what makes them tick. So that's the sort of psychology thing, I guess. And obviously, one of my biggest influences is Agatha Christie. She was fascinated by people and human behavior. But obsession, it's interesting that you say that's in a lot of my books because when you say it, I can see that it's true, but I don't think I particularly notice that because I think I am just naturally quite an obsessive person. So I guess the obsessiveness just automatically goes into my characters and my writing because I'm obsessive.
it seems like it's a very wonderful motivating force, because an obsessive person, and I'm thinking of Beth in your latest book,
Yes, she's
A
very
Perfect Little
obsessive.
Children, and it's the kind of thing that I recoil against, because I think I have my obsessive elements, but I tend to keep them well restrained. And I see Beth, um, and again we're going to jump around here because you start with amazing premise for Perfect Little Children, about a woman, Beth, who sees her estranged friend with two children that she knows she has, except that they appear not they're called by the same names, but they have not grown up in 12 years. And it just her quest to find out what the truth of that was just puts her in all kinds of situations. And of course I'm reading through the pages and I'm inwardly cringing as I'm reading. And that's me. But this is,
Why are you cringing?
I think it's an embarrassment thing.
Right.
I am very much averse to embarrassment. And it's one reason why, for example, like the Office series, the UK version of The Office, I think I was able to get about 3 minutes into it. And there's just things happening, and it's just like, oh, it's a scratching on my soul. But this is what really drives your novels. It's a very strong emotional power. And in the Poirots, for example, as well, I think it's marvelous. I don't think I've actually seen that kind of use put to it in oh, the third book. I'm sorry, I'm blanking out again. Um, oh no, your fourth book, Killings at King. No, not Killings at
Yeah,
Kingfisher Hill. Um,
that yeah, that's the fourth one. Yeah.
Closed Casket, of course. It's a very strong force, and it's just wonderful how it powers the novel, how it powers the motivation behind the events of the book.
Yeah.
Um, let's see. In fact, we can, as a matter of fact, since we're talking about the Poirots, you had stressed in the past that these are continuation novels. Why
Yes.
do you insist on that?
Because I think a lot of people don't know what to call books like this. You know, when a writer writes a book that is featuring and starring a character created by another writer, so obviously Agatha Christie created Poirot, I'm writing new books featuring Poirot, but I'm not Agatha Christie. and I'm writing the books for the people who love Agatha Christie and Poirot and want more Poirot novels. Um, the term that I used to describe that, I mean, I didn't invent it. This was what I heard it defined as, was continuation novels, where one writer takes a character created by a writer who is no longer with us and continues that character in new books. And people don't really know what to call books like that. So I think it's quite important to kind of embrace it as a genre, because a lot of people are quite snobby about continuation novels. They think that they're somehow not quite as legitimate or valid as novels where the writer has invented absolutely everything themselves. And so I personally think continuation novels are just like any other novels, in that they might be good, they might be bad, but the fact of them being continuation novels doesn't in any way make them inherently worse. So I'm quite proud to be writing continuation novels. I think it's a great honour to be continuing one of Agatha's characters. And so I like to sort of proudly say that that is the genre that my Poirot novels are in.
Hmm. And I fully agree with that. I would like to see the new material and to judge it for its own on its own terms, rather than thinking, oh, it's like James N. Cain talking about when was asked if Hollywood had ruined his books, and he said, no, they're right on the shelf. They,
Exactly,
they don't
exactly.
they don't change. I saw this first with the Dorothy Sayers continuation novels by Jill Patton
Yeah,
Walsh, and
yeah,
I enjoyed them very much.
yeah, they're fantastic.
Yeah,
Yeah, Jill Peyton Walsh was a great writer.
yeah. Yeah, and it was wonderful because she knew Dorothy Sayers and was able to have some idea of her work, and she was able to actually bring out like Thrones and Dominations,
Yeah,
which she had written like 8 chapters for, I believe, and Jill helped finish it out and flesh it out at the end. And I thought it was perfectly fine for what it is.
yeah. And Jill, because I knew Jill, she was a friend of mine.
Oh.
Yeah, she sadly died, I think last year, but she was always very proud of the fact that nobody ever knew. She never told anyone, and nobody ever guessed where the join was, where Dorothy L. Sayers' writing stopped and hers began. She was
Mhm.
always very proud of the fact that she'd never told anyone and nobody had ever worked it out.
I've also been reading just recently David Suchet's memoirs about being Poirot. How much he was, of course, but he's very meticulous about it, going through the
Yeah.
books and pulling that. How much work did you feel you had to do, or how was your experience dealing with the character?
Well, it didn't feel like work. What I basically did, I'd already read all of Agatha's Poirot novels many times. I just reread them all, and I think when you know you're going to be writing that character, your rereading experience is inevitably different. I just reread them all. I rewatched all the David Suchet TV versions, and that was my homework. And after that, I felt ready to take the plunge.
Hmm. I understand also that the series that you're writing takes place during a specific period in Poirot's life. Why is that?
It's because when the Christie family and HarperCollins and I were having discussions about when my Poirot novel should be set, and at that point we only knew there was going to be one. We didn't know it was going to carry on as a series. There were lots of discussions about when should we set it. Obviously, Poirot dies in the last book that Agatha wrote about him, Curtain. So we certainly weren't planning to bring him back to life. There was some talk of my Poirot novel being a prequel, so in other words, taking place before the mysterious affair at Styles. But that didn't feel right either, because the mysterious affair at Styles is the first Poirot novel. Everyone knows it is, and it should remain so. And then the editor at HarperCollins, David Braun, who is Agatha's publisher and has been for many years, he said, hang on a minute, there's a gap in the Poirot timeline between 1928 and 1932. So, in other words, between The Mystery of the Blue Train and Peril at End House, Agatha did not write any Poirot novels during that period. And that felt like a very good, convenient slot to slot my book in. And it just felt like it worked really well. So then after that, when they asked me to write more, we just decided that that was where they were going to be. So, however many Poirot novels I end up writing, they will all be set between 1928 and 1932.
Oh, sort of
Um,
like
yeah,
the setting the Miss Marple TV shows at the various times as well. They would always set up the second one was set in the mid 50s, early 50s, I think, or
yeah,
that sort of thing.
yeah.
Well, it certainly means that you'll be consistent with the historical details, so you don't have to worry about trying to jump to a new era to set it in the 50s or this or some other period as well.
Yeah, exactly. And also, that is kind of peak Poirot time,
Mhm.
late 20s, early 30s. I think of that as, the sort of golden age of Poirot when he was absolutely at his best. So I'm quite pleased to be able to set my books then.
Mhm. Well, I think the other thing I love about your work is how much you come up with what I think of as bonkers premises. Most mystery novels, they start with, say, the body, or you read some of like P.D. James's work, and she goes into the characters, goes into the psychology. You find the body, time to call in Adam Dalglish. But you start off with some amazing premises that just seem like, how in the heck did this happen? The last Poirot book, The Killings at Kingfisher Hill, Poirot's asked to solve a murder, in which there's already a confession as the hanging approaches, and he's on a bus ride with Catchpool, and they meet this woman who says that if I sit in a certain seat on the bus, I will be killed. A man has warned me about this. And it's just, I don't know what to say. It's just sort of, this is just like you just come up with, and you have all these premises. I think starting with your first thriller, as a matter of fact, about a baby that the mother decides this baby has been switched.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
All of my books, but it's because, I mean, I have always loved books that have a really ambitious, outlandish, impossible seeming mystery that kicks them off
right.
as a starting point, because my main interest and enthusiasm as a writer and reader of crime fiction is in the mystery element. I'm not particularly interested in crime, it's mystery that I'm interested in. And I've always found that if the mystery is really kind of out there and the reader can't even begin to speculate as to what the explanation might be,
Hmm.
it's more mysterious.
Hmm.
Because if you have a crime novel that begins with a dead body being found, for example, you may not know exactly why that person got murdered, but you can imagine some possible scenarios. Maybe his wife killed him because he was having an affair, or maybe his lover killed him because he was blackmailing her. There's all kinds of things it could well be. I really love crime novels that start with a premise that's so mysterious and weird that if a reader were to try and speculate, they wouldn't be able to come up with a single theory. And that's when you've really got them.
Hmm.
Because I know this as a reader, like when I can't even begin to speculate, that's when I have to know. Because
Hmm.
there's part of my brain that thinks, I just can't imagine any explanation for this. But then you have to read and find out that there is one.
Well, that makes it a very high wire act on your part. Do you sometimes feel, sometimes in a book, that you're thinking, I don't know how to fix this. I don't know how to get out of this. Do you write yourself into a corner?
No, I never allow myself to start writing until I know that I've got enough components of the plot. And if you start with a really ambitious mystery, there's a chance, there's a danger that you won't have a perfect solution for it. So I don't want to spend months writing something and then having to give up on it. So I always do enough kind of mulling over and thinking and eventually quite detailed planning. And it's only when I know that I've got an ending that's as good as the beginning that I start writing.
Hmm. Yeah, you have a plot along the way, so you kind of know your way stations.
Exactly. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
I contrast that with Lawrence Block, who has written numerous books throughout a long career, and he is apparently entirely a writer who writes by the seat of his pants, and as a result, he
Really.
probably has an equal number of busted manuscripts.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I couldn't bear the thought of starting writing something all enthusiastic and then going, oh, well, I guess I haven't got an ending. So giving up.
Well,
But
and there's the
also the longer I do it, the more experience I have, the more I just trust that if I've got a question at the beginning, if I've got a premise that I love enough, I don't doubt that I will come up with a solution, even if at first I can't think of one, even if at first I can think of one and it's not good enough. I mean, that's what happened with Perfect Little Children.
Yeah.
Um, I had the amazing premise. This woman sees these children that haven't grown or aged in 12 years. They're still 5 and 3 years old as they were when she saw them 12 years ago. So that's an impossible, it's impossible. Children do grow. We all know this. So what's going on? Um, and I had a solution to the mystery, but I just wasn't happy with it because it just didn't feel like high impact, high octane. And the beginning is really high octane. So I was kind of thinking, I know this isn't going to be the ending. It was just kind of like a placeholder ending. And then one day I just thought of a much more amazing ending. I was like, aha, that's it. But I now just trust that the right ending will come when I need it.
Hmm. I think I liked about it most about the book is how it ends, in which um, there is some win, there's some loss as well. It's not a perfect solution what we like fiction, like some people like fiction to be, where the good guys lose, or the good guys win, the bad guys lose. Um, it's kind of like you do have successes, but at the same time, there's always a price to be paid for investigating, changing what's the status quo.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
totally, totally. And I think there's kind of a balance that you need to think about in terms of the structure, because if your opening mystery is a more sort of ordinary everyday one, like a police detective finds a dead body and has
Hmm.
to work out who killed the dead body. That's a very ordinary premise. It's like police actually have that situation all the time. And so, in that kind of book, a properly balanced ending might be something like, Peter killed the victim because the victim was blackmailing Peter, and that would be fine. But for a book that begins with a woman saying, these children haven't grown in 12 years, what's going on? You need something to balance that out. So the ending can't be more sort of low key or ordinary than the initial premise. Otherwise, the whole thing feels kind of badly put together.
Hmm. Yeah. And there's still some things, still some questions left open as well, which I can't get into without giving the game away. But you wonder if
Yeah,
there's going to be some kinds of reconciliation going on, but you just
yeah.
you just don't know. That's what the characters will find out.
Yeah, well, again, that's deliberate. I mean, in all my books, I like to I regard there as being some rules of crime fiction that I don't want to break, like the main mystery that you set up, you have to solve.
Yeah.
So the main mystery in Perfect Little Children is, how is it possible that she's seen these children who haven't grown in 12 years when we know that that's not possible, and yet that is what she saw. She knows what she saw. Um, so I have to answer that question because that's what the book is all about. But I never like to tie up every single thing that a reader might wonder about. So I like to solve the central mystery,
Hmm.
but I like there to be questions that the reader can speculate about, exactly in the way that in real life, in real life, we never have a situation where we go, now I've got the answer and I know everything for sure. Like, just never happens. So you want the reader to be able to speculate in a kind of ethical way, just as if it were real people that they know,
Yeah.
while having the main mystery totally solved.
Yeah. And that is totally in line with how people think, because if they have a particular narrative in their head, it's going to take a lot to shift them from that. And
Yeah, exactly.
that's what happens in the end with some of the characters. They've been fed a narrative and they believe that that's what it's about, and they just, in whether or not you can shift it, well, maybe you can, maybe not.
Exactly.
um, there is a question I want to ask. This is something my wife, who also writes, and I have talked about from time to time. Do your characters talk to you when you're not at the keyboard?
They don't talk to me. I'm not one of these writers who says things like the characters just come to life and take over. I'm always aware that they're characters that I've invented. Um, but I think it might just be I just have a different way of thinking of it. If I'm in the middle of writing a book, particularly the first draft, the book and the characters and the situations do kind of fill my head in a fairly obsessive way.
Yeah.
but I just wouldn't call it my characters talking to me. I would just call it like the book kind of becomes all consuming. And I can easily, I mean, I remember when my daughter was little, I set off to drive her to her kindergarten place. And I started thinking about my plot. And I was like, okay, so this is going to happen and that's going to happen. And then I got back home all ready to start because I was thinking about it because I knew that once I dropped her off, I was going to start work for the day. And I pulled up outside the house. I was like, okay, I'm going to go in and start writing all this stuff I've been thinking about. This little voice from the back seat goes, Mummy, you forgot to drop me off. And I'd just driven past the kindergarten and back home. And I was so wrapped up in my plot, I'd forgotten to stop and take my daughter into the building. I think that's probably the most distracted I've ever been.
That is very funny, and yes, there's no right answer to that because my wife had looked at me one day and asked me that very question, and all I could say is no. I have to sit down and write. That's when they talk, and she says they're in my head. They're telling me what they should be doing or what they feel, and that's sort of when I realized that there's many methods of creativity, and there's
Yeah,
just no one right way to do it.
yeah,
Um, one of
exactly.
I want to go on just briefly to the book How to Hold a Grudge because I really do want to let you know I have spent a life reading self-help books. I guess
Oh, really?
that is my
Me too.
obsessiveness from Norman Vincent Peale on up, and there's various books in my life um, that have really meant something to me.
Yeah,
Um, Even if it's just simple books like Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway,
great book.
which was another one that has done that. But how you reframe grudges as an actual positive experience. When I started reading it, I'm going, okay, yeah, okay, you're taking the piss, obviously. But as you were going on and giving examples, I realized you were serious about it, and also it's all right to feel this way about people you love.
Yeah. Yeah. It's all right to feel that way about people you love. It's all right to feel that way about people you dislike. I mean, the thing is, it's so interesting. I was having lunch with a friend today because in England, when we're recording this, it's actually 11:30 at night. So it's the end of my day. And today I had lunch with a friend and I was telling her about something that an ex-friend of mine had done to me that was just like shocking. This ex-friend who is now very much no longer a friend, she just behaved shockingly. So I was having lunch with this other friend and I hadn't seen her for a while. So she asked about this friend and I was like, well, she's not a friend anymore. And I told her the story. And she said, that is so shocking. Then she said, she said, I don't hold grudges against many people, but there are three people in my life who I will never forgive because what they did to me was so bad. And she very quickly told me the three stories. And and she's a really kind, compassionate, forgiving person. But as I was listening to her, I just thought, you know, we spend so much energy, we expend so much energy telling ourselves that we should forgive and we should always be forgiving and that's the right thing to do. But if you look at the reality is that when people treat us not just sort of minorly badly, but when people treat us extraordinarily badly, it really can hurt and feel like an attack. And to then sort of have pressure, usually from ourselves because of what we've learned about how great it is to forgive, the pressure immediately starts up like, I'd better forgive them. I'd better not hang on to negative feelings. And you end up creating a whole load more negative feelings and negative judgments on yourself. And certainly what I've found is that I feel so much better if I just go, yeah, I'm angry.
Mhm,
I don't think the same way about that person. I don't feel the same way about them. And that is okay.
mhm,
And I'm going to validate my own judgment and feelings. And I'm going to allow myself to feel this way without deciding it's a problem for as long as I need to feel this way. And when you kind of give yourself that permission to hold a grudge, what actually happens is that the negative feelings pass through your system much more quickly. Whereas when you're sort of saying to yourself, mustn't hold a grudge, mustn't hold a grudge, must be Christian and forgiving, that's when the sort of wronged feeling inside you digs in and goes, actually, I'm not going anywhere. I have every right to be here. And then your negative feelings get much stronger and you find it harder to forgive the person. So as I say in my book, How to Hold a Grudge, I actually believe that holding grudges in the right way enables us to be more forgiving ultimately.
Hmm.
Because we don't have to, we don't have that initial resistance to the idea that we're allowed to be annoyed.
But also that it allows you to accept that person for what they are, but also impose limits to
Hmm.
realize, oh, I should never loan money to this person. He's never going to pay it back. Therefore, but I can still enjoy
Yeah,
company with them.
yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
Yeah. Um, I also want to get into a little bit you because you were also involved with Cambridge's Institute of Continuing Education, and also you have a Dream Author coaching program that
Yeah.
is actually quite fascinating. Is that also sort of part? Is this all kind of like you wrote the self-help books, including one on happiness, which I have not gotten yet? But is all this part of the writer coaching program? Is this all part of this kind of desire to, I guess, share what you know, share what you've learned?
Yeah, I mean, there's several different strands. So the teaching at Cambridge University, that came about through a conversation with a friend who was already teaching at Cambridge University, and she said, you know, would you fancy coming and doing the odd thing? And I said, well, I wouldn't mind teaching crime writing if there's any need for that. And her eyes lit up and she said, oh, why don't you create a crime writing master's program? And she told me it was going to be, if I did do that, then I'd be teaching it in this beautiful building in a village outside Cambridge. I was like, yes, I'm in. So that sort of developed from that. Dream Author developed from just the fact that I've been helping writers to sort of feel happier and create the success they want to create with their writing. I'd been doing it kind of unofficially for a long time. And then I was a member of a coaching program because I love self-help. So I joined this coaching program as a client, and it had massively changed and improved my life. So then I thought, right, what if I put together all this coaching stuff that I'm interested in with the help that I'm giving to writers anyway? So I created this membership program, and it's amazing. I mean, it's growing at such a rate, and writers who are in the program are achieving amazing things. Just today, I heard that one of my dream authors, as I call them, has just signed a major deal with Netflix.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I mean that, and another one recently got a deal for multiple six figures after an auction, and so I can see how they're benefiting from the coaching, and yeah, it's really exciting.
Well, it certainly is very good credibility for the program because I've seen there's a number of programs out there, and you kind of always look at, okay, who recommends that program, and what has their success has been. So that is very validating for your approach. And it sounds like it's not just skills that you're teaching,
No,
but also the mental health skills needed to persevere in this profession.
yeah, it's all about the psychology and the emotional side, and how to sustain a long and happy and successful writing career, um, and how to basically stop thinking about your writing and your writing ambitions in a way that discourages you, and instead start thinking about them in a way that encourages you, so that you're then able to take the action you need to in order to create the success you want.
Hmm. Yeah. Okay. And if anybody's interested in that, I see that the URL for that is dreamauthorcoaching.com. It's worth checking out. Just one more question. Well, actually, just a couple more, and we'll wrap this up. I wanted to ask about you were a successful writer before you embarked on the Poirot. I mean, you were on the bestseller list. You had two of your novels made into programs by ITV. Has there been any difference in your personal and work life after word got out that you're going to be following up with the one of the most popular iconic detective characters in the world? Do you see your life now as like BP and AP, before Poirot and after?
That's a really interesting question. I don't think anyone's asked me that before. Not really. I mean, the first Poirot novel was a huge news story all over the world, and it was published in something like 45, no, actually I know it was published in 51 countries. So it was a huge sort of global big deal and a bestseller in many countries. So that was a kind of fairly standout moment. But no, I don't really feel it's a before and after. The before and after really for me in terms of my writing career was before my first crime novel, Little Face, became a runaway bestseller that no one expected it to be. Like, no one thought in advance this book's going to be a bestseller. It just took off through word of mouth.
Yeah.
That for me was the moment when everything really changed, much more than the Poirot. I mean, that the Poirot was like an amazing thing, but I was, as you say, I was already successful and established. But before my first crime novel, Little Face, became a sort of word of mouth success, um, I wasn't known at all as a novelist. And if that hadn't happened, if Little Face hadn't sold as well as it did, I may well not have become a successful writer, because it was that book that was like my breakthrough book. And then after that, everybody knew who I was. And then it's very easy to remain a bestseller. Well, it's not easy, but like it's much easier if you're already a bestseller, because then you get, bookshop space and supermarket space, and people talk about your books, and you just have that attention already. Um, so that was for me the moment that felt like the landmark moment.
Hmm. That's excellent. What can we expect from Sophie coming up this year? Anything?
This year, yes, well, Perfect Little Children has just come out in the second of its three formats. So not hardcover and not mass market paperback,
Trade
but the
trade paperback.
trade paperback. It's just come out in trade paperback today, in fact.
Oh,
And The Killings at Kingfisher Hill, my fourth Poirot novel, will also be out in paperback, I think May or June. And then next year, my new psychological thriller is coming out. It's called The Couple at the Table, and it starts with a murder at an exclusive couples only resort, and a woman on her honeymoon with her husband is murdered. And the only people who could have done it, the only person who could have done it is somebody who's in that resort at the time. And everybody in that resort at the time couldn't possibly have done it. So it's kind of a bit like a locked room mystery.
hmm.
The police find that nobody could have done it, and yet somebody must have, because she ended up dead.
Hmm. That's in the Waterhouse series too, isn't it?
It is, yeah, yeah.
Okay. And if readers want to find out more about your books, where can they go?
SophieHannah.com.
Okay. And you have a newsletter as well, don't you?
Yeah, so on the homepage of SophieHannah.com, at the bottom, you can sign up to receive the newsletter. With lots of the newsletter always have lots of giveaways and free goodies and things like that.
Yes. In fact, you talked about the couple at the table and even ran a little contest for it as
Yeah,
well. So
it was a
it was
fun competition, that
yeah,
was.
that was very, very nice. Well, Sophie, thank you very much for. I hope it's not too late for you. It's 6:40 over here in the eastern side of the U.S. So, but thank you very much for taking the time to talk with us at the Mechanicsburg Mystery Bookshop.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me on.
Absolutely. And this is Bill Peschel for the Mechanicsburg Mystery Bookshop. And I just hope that the next favorite book is the book that you're reading right now. Thank you very much. Bye bye.